Friends, back for chapter 19 in the miraculous journey of Edward Tulane. And this chapter, chapter 19, starts with this picture. And it looks like Edward is laying face down, maybe on the floor, it looks like to me. I'm not really sure, but I think that's where he is, on the floor. The days passed. The sun rose and set and rose and set again and again. Sometimes the father came home, and sometimes he did not. Edward's ears became soggy, and he did not care. His sweater had almost completely unraveled, and it didn't bother him. He was hugged half to death, and it felt good. In the evenings, at the hands of Bryce, at the ends of the twine, Edward danced and danced. 1 month passed, and then 2, and then 3. Sarah Ruth got worse. In the 5th month, she refused to eat, and in the 6th month, she began to cough up blood. Her breathing became ragged and uncertain, as if she was trying to remember in between breaths what to do, what breathing was. "Breathe, honey," Bryce stood over her and said. "Breathe," thought Edward from deep inside the well of her arms. "Please, please, breathe." Bryce stopped leaving the house. He sat at home all day and held Sarah Ruth in his lap and rocked her back and forth and sang to her. On a bright morning in September, Sarah Ruth stopped breathing. "Oh, no," said Bryce. "Oh, honey, take a little breath, please." Edward had fallen out of Sarah Ruth's arms the night before, and she had not asked for him again. So face down on the floor, arms over his head, Edward listened as Bryce wept. He listened as the father came home and shouted at Bryce. He listened as the father wept. "You can't cry," Bryce shouted. "You got no right to cry. You never even loved her. You don't know nothing about love." "I loved her," said the father. "I loved her." "I loved her too," thought Edward. "I loved her, and now she's gone. How could this be?" he wondered. How could he bear to live in a world without Sarah Ruth? The yelling between the father and the son continued, and then there was a terrible moment when the father insisted that Sarah Ruth belonged to him, and that she was his little girl, his baby, and that he was taking her to be buried. "She ain't yours," Bryce screamed. "You can't take her. She ain't yours." But the father was bigger and stronger, and he prevailed. He wrapped Sarah Ruth in a blanket and carried her away. The small house became very quiet. Edward could hear Bryce moving around, muttering to himself. And then finally, the boy picked Edward up. "Come on, Jangles," Bryce said. "We're leaving. We're going to Memphis." So here is Bryce holding on to Edward, or Jangles, and he says they're going to go to Memphis. They're walking down the road. Whew. This chapter was really, really sad. Makes Mama Long cry. You know how we talk about really good literature, books that we read that give us the feels, that make us sad or make us really happy or make us fall in love with characters. Those are the best kind of books, even though they're sad and it's really, really hard to read them. They really move us and they make us feel things. And that's really, really important with stories. So remember how I had promised you to only read you the best stories that I could find. So I know that was sad, and I know that was a really hard chapter. It made me really sad too. But sometimes that's what makes the best books. They stay with us. They live in our hearts because we feel those things about them. So Jangles has lost Sarah Ruth, who he loved. I mean, he was falling apart. His sweater was unraveling. His ears were all slobbery because she would suck on them and chew on them. and he didn't care. Now, if you think back to the beginning of the story and think about what we knew about Edward at the beginning, he was so vain. He was so all about himself. He didn't care about other people. He cared what he looked like. He cared all about his appearance. And now, wow, things have really, really changed. And he's being very selfless. He's not caring about himself. He was worried about Sarah, and he wanted her to be happy. He wanted to take care of her. That's love. That is learning to love. And I think Edward has learned some really, really important lessons in our story so far. So I hope that chapter didn't make you too sad. I know it's hard to read those kind of chapters. But like I said, those chapters move us and they live with us, and we don't forget books like this. They take us on journeys, they take us places that we wouldn't get to go without reading it. So I hope that you enjoyed chapter 19, and I'm kind of anxious now to see what happens to Jangles or Edward next. I'm hoping that good things lie ahead for him and for Bryce. So when we meet again for this book, I will share chapter 20 with you. Okay.